Thanks very much, Linda. Welcome everybody to another Zoom meeting. And today's conversation for myself, the theme is the water trine. And this is a part two to a Zoom meeting I'd done, I think, the beginning of December, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe even a little bit earlier last year. As a introduction to this theme, I would highly recommend watching that video alongside this conversation today, just so that there is a fluidness in the communication that I'm sharing and the depth that I'm wanting to transmit. I still don't think that today will cover all of what I want to share in terms of the nature of the water trine, as I feel that there are different ways that it can be interacted with. So today's theme for me is I want to take the spiritual relationship that we have to the water trine, which I'll explain what the water trine is, and reflect to us the actual biochemistry of how this phenomena evolves us, right? So it's super easy for us to have these words like spiritual transformation or things like, okay, so we evolved through the water trine. What does that mean? What does that mean within the context of evolutionary astrology? And how else? Yeah, what is it? Like, how does it actually work? So, like I said, today's focus is to share with you some of the core concepts of how the body is operating when we experience the relationship between astrological transits and soul dynamics. So that there is, well, one of my hopes is that when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're either teaching EA or you're sharing knowledge about it, or you're having a conversation regarding this evolutionary dynamic, the water trine, then there is this additional information that you can have around how the body is actually transforming itself. So that's my main focus today. So what is the water trine, and what do I mean by evolving through the emotional body? And for anybody that's watching this, of course, again, I highly recommend that you watch part one, because it goes into depth there. But very, very briefly, what we mean by the water trinity or the water trine and evolving through the emotional body in EA is simply how the soul experiences actual evolution versus more of a mental idea of soul growth. Okay, so how does soul growth actually work, and how do the relationship patterns and how does the soul actually transmit a change in its life in a very authentic way? So how does it actually happen? The water trine reflects to us the nature of how this works through three symbols, which I'll show you in my PowerPoint presentation. The sign of Pisces, the sign of Scorpio, and the sign of Cancer. Those are the water symbols in this water trinity. And again, evolving through the emotional body is what this is all about. Those are the symbols that reflect the nature of our emotional connection to life. We as human beings are coded with a relationship pattern. This relationship pattern, when we connect with it, gives us a connection to God, Goddess. Now, it's very difficult for us to access the totality of truth because, from my opinion at least, the nature of truth in itself is too vast for us to comprehend within the mind at least, and also the vastness of it means that what we can only experience, again, from my opinion, subjective opinion, is that what we're capable of being able to emotionally process or to become aware of in our time it has a limited scope. Jeffrey Wolf Green used this analogy where he talked about the light bulb. And he talked about if consciousness was, say, for instance, the experience of consciousness was at 100 watts, and the bulb could only contain, say, for instance, 60. And that electrical surge went through that bulb at 100 watts, it would actually blow it. So very similar patterns here. I've actually come across somebody, funnily enough, has Jupiter square the nodes, that has had an experience where their consciousness was opened too much and too far for what the ego could contain. And that can cause trauma. I think I've had past lives in which that has occurred for me too, because I definitely one of the lessons for myself in this lifetime is to digest emotional reality in a way that is nourishing versus just accelerating and not really getting the essence of it. So that's one of the reasons, again, why I'm so connected with this type of teaching or this type of theme. It's because not only through my direct experience, emotional body, of how this works, I'm also aware of how important it is. And so this is another sort of reason as to why, again, I'm sharing this today. So I'm going to pause it for a second and just say, does everybody connect with what I'm talking about here, at least on today's call? Nobody's confused about what I mean by this.
Yes, fine.
Okay. Okay, great. So just making sure that we're all following that there. Okay. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I just want to walk everybody through, and just kind of a storyboard, actually, in terms of, okay, just move everything off my screen. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Because it says on my screen, it's telling me, please move this window away from the application.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Fantastic. So we'll start off with the actual water trine itself, again, just leading everybody into today's conversation. Evolution through the emotional body, right? I need to have that working. There we go. Okay, so what is the biochemical process of spiritual growth? Okay, and I relate this process of spiritual growth through and the connection to the emotional body, because it is the emotional body that is what connects our physical form to spirit. Okay, it is through that process of us feeling, do we know how spirit is moving us, right? So what is taking place in the actual body when we are experiencing this more transcendental expression of life, or the phenomena of spirit? Okay. So again, just reminding everybody to have a look at the water trine video and the inner Zoom meetings videos. The first one, because I go into depth about describing the Scorpio, the Pisces, and the Cancer archetype. But just for this sake, we're dealing with Pisces, we're dealing with Scorpio, and we're dealing with Cancer. Cancer, within the context of the water trinity, is the self-identity. Okay. We each need a sense of identity that allows us to relate to the phenomena of reality. Each of us develops this self-identity through our lives, through the experiences that we have, through the imprinting that we receive when we're young children and from our birth parents or lack of, the way that we experience school, and of course the dynamic of our lives, right? The types of trials and tribulations that we have, where we experience ecstatic moments of joy and where we experience moments of loss and sadness and grief. Each of those experiences shapes our inner sense of identity and that relatability to the rest, to how we then express ourselves outwardly, right? The Scorpio part of this dynamic reflects on a deep, deep level, the core level, the nature of desire. So each of us has a desire nature that reflects to us how we make choices. And so in each desire, it leads us to make a choice that ultimately brings us closer to what we idealized as, or what we imagined to be, the experience versus the actual experience. And that relationship is rooted in the Pisces archetype, which is mentioned over here. Now, there are two ways in which this works. When you take the angle and you go from Pisces to Scorpio, and then from Scorpio to Cancer, and then from Cancer to Pisces, what we have here is the natural trinity, or the natural way of evolution working, which is where the wave arises out of the ocean. Pisces, Scorpio, the desire nature. That desire nature links with the emotional sense of identity, And that emotional identity then has direct experience of the original wave that allowed itself to form when we had the desire. And so each experience that we go through culminates, and once it culminates, we are left with the imprinting of it. Okay? The other dynamic in which this works, and which is what I would say, and what Yogananda would talk about as well, Sri Yukeshwar, around the Maya, and how spiritual awakening is an experience of breaking through the illusion of the Maya. And so the illusion in this context is the Neptune archetype, and how that Neptune connects with the Cancer archetype, which is when we get drawn into fantasy, when we get drawn into and we get moved into experiences that are not bringing us closer to spirit, but actually creating a separation from it by getting lost in the Maya, getting lost in the illusion of separateness. And that emotional confrontation naturally occurs with us from Cancer to Scorpio, and also the emotional attachment that's linked with the power and that desire. So for most of us, when you study the core EA teaching, you'll know that Pluto is central because it reflects to us the initial desires and core attachments that brought us to this life. So in order for us to evolve through these dynamics, we would need to have to recognize the patterns of separation, on emotional separation, that exist within us, and understand what the purpose of fulfillment is trying to shape us, i.e. that when we evolve through our separating desires, when we allow them to naturally unfold without judgment, we are able to reach a space not only of realization that was a separating desire, but also a natural point in which we come back to the original source and to understand it at its deeper level. And it brings us closer to creating holes within the Maya of our psyche, so that we can really, truly be authentic with our desires and understand the deeper core lessons that are happening on a subconscious level. So this water trinity really is the dynamic of how we're able to access this depth within our lives that exists beyond the fabric of conditioning that is on our minds, the fabric and conditioning that is imprinted on us, but actually to get to the deeper layers of this process. Okay, so the water trinity opens us up. Okay, so let's just erase that there so that we can move on to the next one. So as I said again, the focus of today's conversation, and again, this is primarily on how the body is interacting with the phenomena of reality, and how the water trinity is a part of, and its connection, right? Spirit and matter. I'm sure many of you have come across this type of work where I can't remember the person's name exactly. I know it's a doctor, so-and-so. I was reading about it today and I didn't write his name down, but if anybody feels free to write it in the chats, that would be great. And I could share that for the YouTube recording. But this is a really important piece of understanding the connection between our emotions and the body. Okay. In this diagram, or this picture over here, you can see that there are compassion, you can see thank you, wisdom, and then you can see water crystals formed under certain other types of environments. Like for instance, this is I will kill you, or you fool. These are very negative emotions, very dense emotional fields, whereas these emotional fields and these words represent a higher frequency. So generally speaking, when the body is experiencing an event that has a deep threatening nature to it, like for instance, I will kill you, or you're being shamed into something in which the internal dialogue as well as the outer world is expressing a deep saddened emotion, like you fool, for instance, how could you do that? A classic Virgo type of energy connected with Capricorn, in which there is a judgment and a criticism on, especially when it comes to man-made law. So we have these emotions within us because the body is primarily made up of water. Obviously, when we interact with experiences that are negative in context, either vibration is low, the body will transform itself or respond to it according to the frequency. And so naturally speaking, when we are vibrating or operating with love and joy and acceptance and a place within ourselves that is embracing unity, i.e. Neptune, and we're following and in synchronicity with our lives, we're actually experiencing the water molecular structure within ourselves form this type of pattern. Whereas again, when we're constantly under trauma, when we're constantly in states of depression, or that our life is giving us environmental feedback that reveals to us we're not obviously in a healthy space, then naturally speaking, we're going to have our bodies transformed into this. And it's not a coincidence that most of the dis-ease that we experience within our lives comes from the karmic environment that we're in. And so the water memory slide here is sharing with us that there is an intimate connection between the way that water responds to environments and how our body is naturally connected to water. And so we are directly going to experience water forming in us relative to our environment. And what is this to do with the water trinity and evolves through the emotional body? Well, think about it. The whole purpose of reaching a point of realization is to heal the body, right? The body has a natural function in it that heals itself. And what I find really interesting about it is that when we do injure ourselves, particularly through a cut, for instance, like today I got a paper cut, within a few hours, the wound had already begun to form a layer of protection around it. And I didn't give it instructions. I didn't like talk to my wound and say, look, you now need to heal. My body knew exactly what it needed to do. It's almost as if there was an intelligence operating without my mind. And just that knowing, just that understanding that the body has this regenerative capacity gives us a very profound insight into not only its capabilities, but also the potential of understanding what the body is here as in form and its relationship to spirit and its relationship to the deeper evolutionary dynamics in which we have come to understand in this lifetime for ourselves and the multiple lifetimes we experience. And what does water have to do with it? What does the nature of emotion have to do with it? There's a string of connectivity over here. So within our healing modalities, of course, if we are, say, for instance, experiencing compassion from another person, when we are healing a trauma that exists within us, the general behavior when we are healing ourselves is to find safety and openness and a place of where we can allow our guard to go down, and so therefore vulnerability. And if you were to experience healing where the other person was saying, I'll kill you, or you were a fool, or that was stupid of you to do, not only is your body going to contract, but it's not going to open up to the next levels of ways in which the body heals itself, which we'll get into today. Okay. So you can see that there's a natural process of safety and security and openness and vulnerability as a way for emotions to flow through us. And pretty much our world doesn't really offer that. So there are what we call retreats materializing all over the place, because on one level, that's a place of safety from the outside world, quote unquote, safety from the outside world, because it is pretty dangerous with a lot of unconscious behavior. So a spiritual transformation, the real God. To me, it's really, really clear, but then at the same time, it might not be so easy to accept. And so maybe that's why it seems a little bit sort of confrontational, and maybe I'm holding up a cross and trying to, convince people of this information. But God in itself, the nature of God in itself, has always been ascribed in deep esoteric teachings as the pineal gland and what its function is within the context of the limbic system. And it's not a coincidence that when you look at the drawing of the Egyptians, and when they drew the Eye of Horus, and what they were referencing here was their understanding of the limbic system in its deeper levels, and how the brain itself on a biological level correlates to the connection between the matter and the non-physical. So there must be something in the physical that represents God that we as human beings can have as a mechanic to connect with this deeper layer of existence that's beyond our physical senses, that is the infinite goddess expression. So how do we access that? How do we actually get ourselves into a place from a brain biological perspective where we can experience this God? And patriarchy has, and the expression of masculine principles have created spiritual belief systems in which we needed to ascend, right? We need to access higher states of awarenesses and transcend the body's pain in order for us to understand God. And part of it is natural because, of course, the masculine principle itself is to ascend. It is to move vertical, whereas the feminine principle is a horizontal energy pattern. And when they combine together, they create a center point, which is our heart center. So, of course, human beings naturally had to evolve through this dynamic of ascending, which is why a lot of spiritual teachings probably 2008 would have been deeply, deeply, deeply connected to just masculine principles. Whereas the world is changing right now, and a lot of people are realizing that to access the truth, we experience it through the emotional body. And through the emotional body, we create what is called transcendence. But it's not the masculine form of transcendence, which is to transcend the body and its limitations, although Saturn in itself can be definitely frustrating at times when you realize the limitations and the body it represents. But it's more about actually accessing a higher state of awareness through the way that the limbic system works, through this picture of the Eye of Horus. It was created like this because this function within the brain allowed us to access this deeper layer of empathy, this deeper layer of emotional awareness that existed beyond our physical senses, and then to bring that back into our body, not to access it and then stay out in a disassociated type of way, but to bring it back into the body so that the body, through its water component, could transmute the molecular structure. So when you're looking at the real transformation, spiritual transformation, the real God-Goddess unity, what we are experiencing is a return back to ourselves. So that's the wording, but the actual physical experience, the actual direct experience of what that means is to move through separation, right? So that's why, classically speaking, most spiritual teachers will talk about you heal, you move through the pain, right? Or it's the pain body that activates that, or you've got to move through your illusions, Neptune. And again, here we bring in the water trinity as well, because as I mentioned before, in the water trine picture, it was Neptune to Cancer, and Neptune to Cancer was filled with the toxicity. It was filled with the process of separation, the illusion of separation. And when we get real with ourselves, we see through that distortion, or in a very more subtler way, we can just talk about the illusion of the Maya that is on the psyche, and how we break holes through that psyche, that veil, until we see clearly. And the way that we see clearly is through the function of the brain. That's how it naturally works. We can't do it through thought. It has to happen through this way. So this diagram over here, and the connection between ancient teachings and the brain, has a direct connection to understanding the real God, understanding the real unity within ourselves, which is, again, to dissolve all of our boundaries of separation. Okay, so brain circuitry. So we have this little interesting dude. He's called a pituitary gland, and we have the hippocampus, and we have the hypothalamus as well, and the normal thalamus. There are two of them that are existing within there, and the amygdala. Right now, for most of you that have studied the brain and understand the neo science around this might be simply very silly information. But it's very profound to understand the context of what this is actually talking about, because Within the hippocampus, okay, exists all stored memory within our experiences. Now, for somebody like myself that has a tremendous amount of Aquarius connections with Mars squaring Uranus and Venus and Uranus on top of my Jupiter and South Node, and then of course Saturn in Scorpio, I have a direct relationship to traumatic residue stuck within my brain that creates, that when it gets triggered, creates deep flashbacks in which there is an emotional turbulence within my psyche. And it's only up until I started to study the brain and why these things were operating that I begin to actually heal myself, which is another experience of evolving through the emotional body, right? There are different layers to this. There is, so in this case, not only through direct experience was I able to understand and take control of my brain and how it was working, I also learned a great deal about what is the type of biochemistry that's occurring when I'm in a traumatic flashback. And a big part of this is understanding where these memories are imprinted. What I find really fascinating about this is that from the perspective of the mind itself, we are moving consistently through time. So therefore, each moment is moving forward, whereas a memory that's stored within the hippocampus and the sensitivity and neuroconnection that has been made to the amygdala, which is, think of it like the alarm bell in the schooling system, right? Or in any building. Whenever you hear the alarm bell go off in a building, you know that there's a part of your brain that reacts to, I need to run, I need to I need to escape the situation. So the amygdala is this kind of alarm bell that gets triggered every time it senses an experience that would be similar to the event that occurred when you had a trigger, and amongst other things as well. So the context of this is that this relationship between the hippocampus and amygdala has formed within ourselves imprints and neuroconnections of traumatic experiences or experiences that have been negative to us. In this dimension, there is no time. There is no linearity to it. So at the age of 5, when you were, say, for instance, hurt by somebody or the parents didn't acknowledge you, that emotional imprint gets stuck. And when we get older in life and we interact with people, that subconscious part of ourselves still shows up. And a very simple test that you can actually use to understand where you are in your emotional development is to look at these 3 things. If you notice yourself responding to an experience where your emotional relationship to it is, I need to prove myself, or I'm not good enough, you can pretty much guarantee that you're in your teenage years where some form of development within the emotional body, the emotional dynamics occurred, because that's the point where we really want to prove ourselves within our emotional development. When we feel that we're unloved, when we feel that we can't be accepted or that there's something wrong with us, it's generally when we're between the ages of 0 and just as we're about to enter our teens, because that's a point where the most amount of love is actually needed from our parents, because that's where not only is it the first part of our years, but it is also where we're developing a relationship to this reality in which we need an intense amount of care and love to show us that this is a safe place. Otherwise, it can be completely hell. That's why you'll notice that when you work with people that have got especially souls that have got their parents, like they were orphans or there was a lot of damage occurred right in the beginning of their life, they're more prone to using disassociating substance abuses later on, or have strong dissociating tendencies, because the desire to return to a point of complete love and acceptance is distorted. And so therefore, what replaces that at an older age is things like, for instance, any activity that releases higher levels of dopamine. So what is the connection between what I'm sharing here and the emotional body? Well, the brain itself has this function in which, and this was what I'm talking about with this pituitary gland, this brain has this function where when we are developing within our lives and our brain's developing, there are 2 dynamics that are occurring. we're either having healthy integration, and the hippocampus is through the amygdala storing positive experiences that allows us to be emotionally healthy when we get older, or we are having sort of damaged imprinting patterns occur for us, which later on become one of the reasons why we tend to go to therapy or have to investigate into the way that we interact with human beings the way that we do, and on to understand the core level of our dissociative patterns. And this can, when you take EA and you really go into past life dynamics, it's this area of the brain that's actually being healed when we're evolving through the emotional body, which is to actually take an experience that might be rooted in the past, maybe previous life dynamics, and the way to re-engage within that experience and to develop a healthy emotional pattern is to rewire the brain. And that's why, again, this brain circuitry is so important. And the stored imprinting is existing within the amygdala and hippocampus because that would have created itself in this early life. So I hope that that's clear for everybody so far. The hormonal centers, which is the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, also play a huge role within the way that we respond to our traumas and also our experiences. And again, the purpose of me sharing this, just to create extreme focus, is that when we are experiencing a transit in our day, right? So let's say, for instance, we're experiencing Uranus transit our 4th house. And maybe some of you have had this transit before and you have a direct experience of knowing that this can be a disruptive time in your home. Not in a negative way, but it can be in a way, in a sense that your emotional sense of safety and security and habitual patterns of what you've done are going to be coming up for review, and they're going to be rewired with Uranus. So naturally speaking, with the transit coming through the 4th house, let's say, for instance, you have some past life stuff around the self-identity being traumatized, and Uranus transits your 4th house. Of course, this is going to bring up dynamics within your life in which you are going to need to evolve through. But you are not existing in an ethereal plane. You're existing on the material plane as well, and your body is having imprinting and direct experience of what is occurring on the physical form. So how does the brain interact with these experiences? How does your physiology actually shape according to the way that this transit's occurring? And this is the core theme here, that astrology is reflecting the dynamics in your life, but your body is actually interacting with it and the energy as it is, and they are no separate. So you can actually take full awareness of how your brain is interacting with these dynamics and allow yourself to not get caught up in, quote unquote, being hijacked, right? In the sense, and maybe if we've got some time, I'll go into a deeper explanation of that. But the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus are connected with the endocrine system, which is, I think, my next slide. So let me just see if it is. I put it here somewhere. Okay, maybe I didn't. The endocrine system. And the endocrine system plays a really big role within the context of the body, because it is the system that not only is responsible for the way that chemicals are released within the body and how we respond to it, but it is also how we're going to either experience something positive or negative, i.e. conditioning. Okay, so most of us, if we've had a painful experience, our pituitary gland and the hypothalamus and thalamus will reveal to us, our brain will obviously tell us with the context of the situation, and our body will say to us, this is a painful experience. You need to secrete hormones through the channel of the endocrine system into the body so that whatever pain I'm dealing with right now can be numbed out, right? So the pituitary gland is responsible for secreting 4 types of hormones. 2 of them I'm going to talk about today, called oxytocin and, of course, endorphins itself. Now, what is the point again with these 2 glands? Again, they're part of the limbic system. The limbic system has in itself the actual system itself, which contains the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and also the pineal gland. And the pineal gland in this context secretes a hormone that's called melatonin and serotonin. And it's, again, in the previous picture I'm sharing with you over here, has a direct relationship to, here, the pineal gland has a direct relationship to secreting these hormones that allows us to sleep. And when we sleep, the brain is in a different state, generally REM. And this is our subconscious, right? So when we do dream analysis, Neptune, we are analyzing the deeper archetypal impressions that the brain has internalized through past lives and through this life. And of course, when we're dream analyzing, we're getting a deeper connection to the subconscious so that we can then begin to understand what type of subconscious behaviors are influencing our more conscious awakened state. So part of this process of us interacting with, in this example, Uranus transit the 4th house, is that, let's say, for instance, you're somebody that has had a lot of trauma towards instability, emotional instability, and you have now Uranus transit the 4th house. Think about what types of emotional imprinting and amygdala conditioning has taken place in the hippocampus relative to early life imprinting where mom or dad was emotionally unstable. So there was a lot of chaos. Now, you also got to think here that the brain creates neuro connections, okay, that in today, as neuroscience is exploring it on a deeper level, is called neuroplasticity. And this process is where we have the brain burn neurological pathways within our psyche or within our function, that when we are experiencing and consistently interacting with a certain experience, it's going to lead us to thinking that this is the way that things are. That's why changing our habits can be such a difficult thing, because if we're unaware of how the brain has formed these habits to begin with, how can we take advantage of recognizing that the brain also has the capacity to deactivate those burnt neurons, i.e. the pathways, and recreate new ones through changing our habits. And this is the key here with people that go through things like Alcoholics Anonymous or any form of group meetings in which there's been trauma or damage to our psyche. The brain has this capacity to rewire itself. And it is all rooted in the way that the limbic system actually programs itself and interacts with it. That's why when we make new choices under old circumstances, we're actually directly rewiring the way that the brain works. And think about it, in EA, the correlation between the brain is Uranus, right? Deconditioning, new dendrites. So here we come back to the story. This soul has Pluto transit the 4th house all of a sudden, sorry, not Pluto, Uranus, and there starts to become a little bit of disruption within the context of their home. Now, of course, this transit is obviously creating a need to break away from old patterns and emotional identity structures and to liberate the soul from whatever has been of the past. So this transit is absolutely necessary. But if the conditioning factor within the brain is the way that it is in a damaged way, how do you think this is going to be met? So what we're trying to understand here through this water trine and through evolving through the emotional body is that if our emotions and our connection to the emotions have been internalized through that imagery of how water becomes crystallized within the body, then it's natural to say that if we are to embrace evolutionary change within our lives, we have to really understand what type of emotional relationship we have to our own self first, and how that can be through the way that the chemistry and the brain and of course the body has created itself, how that can be offering resistance, which obviously then steps in the way that we have formed, Virgo, different healing modalities to release emotional trauma within our body, right? There are different, and there are many modalities in which that works through. This occurs naturally through the role of the pituitary gland and hypothalamus. Now, let's say, for instance, this person has this Uranus transit the 4th house, and they experience 5 experiences in their day that are disruptive. The pituitary gland will secrete a hormone called endorphins, okay? The word endorphin is an abbreviated version of, okay, this is pretty funny, indigenous, that's not indigenous, okay, I'm failing with this pronunciation of that word, it's my fault, but morphine. Morphine is a type of opiate, and so this whole context around the endorphin has been specifically coded within our body, within our endocrine system, to numb out pain, Neptune. So we have 2 ways in which we embrace pain. We either numb out from it because it's painful for us, Or what we do is we do the emotional work with another person and we release emotion from our bodies. And when we're releasing emotion from our bodies, it's generally because we feel safe. Oxytocin. And so I encourage both everybody that's watching this video to go and research these different chemical structures that exist within our brain and what functions they are. And also, and I'm being very clear about this, don't see the information on the internet that has been done through endorphins being positive, happy things. They're not. Endorphins are not designed in the body to create happiness. They're designed to numb out experiences of deep separation and pain that we're unable to process. It's something that suppresses emotions within the context of the body until eventually it becomes unconscious. That is when you see the world in a general state of unconscious behavior, because when you look at the foods that we eat, what we are trying to do is we're trying to create the oxytocin chemical within our brain, which is embrace, trust, love, acceptance, and touch. And if you look at the world today, how much of that is really a part of our society? It's not. It's very little, right? So when we have an intimate partner, for instance, and we're experiencing intimacy, we're generally more likely to be vulnerable and open with them because of the touch and the safety that gets provided, because the pituitary gland is releasing oxytocin, which is the natural chemical reaction for being embraced, to trust. And when we're trusting, we're more open to change within our lives. Whereas when we are releasing endorphins or morphine within the body structure, it's not because we feel safe. It's in fact the complete opposite. And that is why when you look at our foods today, when you look at the consumption of sugar, when you look at the consumption of the way that we numb out our feelings, it's because we constantly are experiencing the need for our brain to release the chemical endorphins so that we can repress those emotions. So in the context of this water trine over here, remember I spoke about Neptune, Scorpio, and Pisces, Cancer. The emotional body is evolving by confronting the deeper layers of our emotional dynamics and healing them through seeing that there is no separation between the physical form and what the soul is bringing for us here to learn. And if we can embrace that unity, then what we can do is we can actually release oxytocin within the brain that creates levels of empathy, that creates levels of compassion for other people, that allows us to see deeper into the soul. Because not only are we transcending the boundaries of limitation, we're also in that state, not having the brain consistently tell the body you're in pain, and the body say, yes, I'm in pain, so therefore send the guys that numb the pain out. But when that numbing endorphin goes within the body, when you have to heal yourself again, and that pain comes back up, your body's going to naturally say, I need more things to shut me down. That's why we emotionally shut down when we have a big trauma, because that's what happened. That's what happened in the hippocampus. So our bodies have memory. And of course, the body keeps count. And so that's why the body is a beautiful vehicle for us to understand the core psychic tensions that we're experiencing, because depending on where on the body we're experiencing the pain will dictate to us through holistic medicine where we need to focus on an area of our lives that is causing us pain and suffering. Because when we're interacting with something that we don't feel liberation from, when we don't feel embraced by, when we feel alone, when we feel depressed by it, the body is not responding through releasing oxytocin. It's responding by releasing endorphins, which keeps us in a repressive state. It's numbing us out. So it's a big thing to think about, considering that Neptune's in Pisces is the stage, and most of us have been experiencing the pain of Chiron square Saturn, and of course, the dynamics of Chiron in Pisces in and of itself. And that we're able to actually create deeper levels of empathy and compassion and self-love when we start to see how the body releases the correct hormone within the body. Think about what happens when a baby is having breast milk from the mother. That first moment, the body actually releases through the breast milk oxytocin. It's that bonding mechanism that takes place over there. And that's when we can bond as human beings. That's the actual physical way in which we can change the biochemistry so that the biochemistry doesn't run us, we run it. Cool. So things that are pretty amazing to understand within the context of this, and this is my last slide, is healing foods. one of the greatest ways for us to actually release the poison, Neptune, from our body is to understand regenerative foods. So the food you eat can be either the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And it's beautiful because within the context of the Earth trine over here, we can either be slowly decaying, death, Scorpio, Neptune decay, right? Slow poison killing us. Or we can embrace regenerative foods within our lives that are full of color and basically consistently keep on putting enzymes within the body, because spiritual transformation must occur with supporting enzymes. The body cannot simply hold higher states of awareness in spiritual transformation if there are not the correct amounts of enzymes in the body. So a very big part of actually allowing yourself to evolve through the emotional dynamics and for emotions to come up in a natural way that are not blocked and clogged. Think of the drains within our home. Think of the water system that exists within your home. We don't think about how that was working. We just see water come out of a tap, use it for cleaning our hands or cleaning the dishes, and then it goes down the sink. And when we get a blocked drain, we call a plumber. Think of Pluto as the plumber, right? Because he's going, and the application of getting all of the gunk out of the pipes is the sort of like ickiness, as I would want to call it in Neptune, when we're in our illusions, when we're eating foods that suppress the emotions through supporting the need for consistent endorphin release and dopamine release, versus eating foods that are actually going to detoxify, Neptune, the body, so that the regenerative capacity of the body, Pluto, allows us to live longer than what we think we can live. And it's all rooted in our foods as well. So I'm going to end there. Thanks very much for listening. I appreciate your time and participating in this experience. And I really hope that this was nourishing in every way. So I'm going to pause and then see if there's anybody that wants to chat a bit for this.
Yeah, I have a question, SΥmონ. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Fantastic. Okay, the feeling connection to spirit. Intuition, I feel, is also a kind of a feeling, but it correlates to Sagittarius, which is fire and not water. Yeah. But at the same time, Jupiter is a co-ruler of Pisces. So I guess there would be a connection there. So where does intuition come into this water trine?
Okay, well, the way I would divide it within my own understanding is that the spirit itself has a lot more to do with, for me personally, when I identify spirits, I feel it as, if I'm going to stand here or like sit in front of everybody here and do this Zoom meeting, something's moving me to do this in an enthusiastic way. And enthusiasm, by the way, is the pituitary gland, pineal gland, releasing serotonin within the brain that says, wow, this is super exciting. This is super exciting. And Uranus, the electrical field, says, I'm attracted to this. This is resonating. So when I see intuition, Jupiter, maybe not necessarily as a fire sign, but I see it more as a whisper of insight that comes through experiences of the past. It's like the knowledge, right? And the spirit itself is more about something that is a deep knowing that cannot actually be described to another person. So even as I sit here today, the way, again, I'm trying to break the difference here is that, to me, intuition is more of that silent whisper that gives me an insight, whereas the emotional body of Neptune is that moment of realization that transcends the darkness of my limitation. I'm having a trouble with this relationship. I can't seem to understand what's going on. And then all of a sudden, I realize in that moment, through an awakened state, that there's something about this type of behavior that could be creating the karmic interaction between the two. And so I suppose through becoming aware of that and allowing my own limitations to be dissolved in that moment, and to then choose to act in a way that is deeply nourishing to not only myself, but of course to the other person. So empathy and compassion becomes the vehicle of emotion, whereas intuition, I don't see it as emotion, as more as a moment of clarity, or no, it's a moment of insights that that I don't know, like allows for a deepening of understanding versus an awareness. I don't know how to differentiate the two, but I hope that maybe somebody else can help me out with that process. But there is a subtle difference between the feeling of knowing versus the awareness of knowing.
That describes it really well. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah,
Any other
like I said,
questions?
I don't feel like I answered the question completely, but
No, I think you did. Okay, anyone else? Please go ahead.
Yes, please. I have a grandwater trine in my chart, and I always find that it works. It's so unconscious, you know. It is a flow of energy that is very hard to analyze or to understand. I find that even I do write a lot, and I find that it has been one of the best tools really to connect with that flow and that energy. But still, I find it so unconscious. It's so deep that it is very hard to. And I thank you. This is a wonderful lecture. I mean, really talking about all of those brain function and how they relate in our body, in our emotion, in the food that we eat. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I wanted to respond something that you remind me of something that I found was really interesting. How many balsamic phase planets do you have in your chart?
Balsamic. I have Sun conjunction Uranus, and no, it's not balsamic. The Sun is 3 and the Uranus is 5. So this one is. I have Mars in Libra in a large conjunction to Neptune. So this one is balsamic.
Okay. Because what I noticed was that generally speaking, when cycles are about to complete themselves, balsamic energy, Neptune, of course, just as the classic story, right? When we start to read a book, we don't have an emotional relationship to it. When we go through the experience, we have and develop an emotional connection to it that changes us. When we finish the book, when we summarize it and we feel the book, we don't take the book with us. And whenever we talk to people, go, hey, by the way, this is a book I read because I'm carrying it with me. We access a part of our awareness that not only is activated by the hippocampus and the emotional imprinting that's associated with it, but also that culminative experience of closing the book and the feeling that sits in our heart. It's transcendent. And so within the context of balsamic phase relationship planets, because it's a Pisces energy, when we are evolving out of that phase of relationship, or we're experiencing the evolution of that phase of relationship, it's the emotional body that moves us, that changes us. It's an experience that changes us, and the deepening or a return to God, as it were. I know my Mars and Venus is in a complete conjunction with each other. They're like literally a minute apart in a balsamic phase. And I know that in my relationship, evolving through the emotional body is the only way for me to actually create deeper unity with the ultimate idea of that phase of relationship, which is to connect with Source. And I wanted to quote it in this PDF today from the 2016 or 2015 EA glossary, when Jeffrey's talking about the balsamic phase relationship to any planets, and that it's about evolving through the emotional body with those dynamics, because it's the awareness and culminative of that cycle that leads us to creating the next experience. Just as a Pluto 12th house soul would experience its life, just as the Pluto transit your 12th house would experience that period of your life. You get lost in the hay or the haze, should I say, but yet at the same time, when that Pluto hits your ascendant, the experience is it's different. You actually let go of something, and it's you bring the memories of that experience past. So I'm going to stop there because I think it's pretty clear of what I'm talking about. But I noticed balsamic phase planets in charts, a lot of water trinity or a lot of water energy, because the water signs help that evolving emotional body. I'm just going to fix my camera there quickly.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Please go ahead, anyone.
SΥmõn, I had a thought on what you and Linda were talking about. You think that might have to do with the south node of Neptune being in Aquarius, and Aquarius being associated with that long-term far memory?
Yeah,
far as intuition?
absolutely. I don't know if most, I'm still trying to find the connection, but at the moment, I noticed on the internet, and because I have a tremendous amount of unfortunate conditioning around this, but I noticed that there's a lot of people trying to heal narcissistic wounds. And the North Node of Neptune being in Leo, and the South Node being in Aquarius over there, I've noticed that a lot of our trauma is where the self-identity or the orientation of the self has become so overdeveloped through the masculine principle that we've separated from the deeper meaning of our existence. And a big part of this trajectory over here is to heal ourselves, but because we can't heal the narcissistic wound is where we have abandoned ourselves, where we have lost connection with our spirit, where we've chosen to appease other people and their wounding and their destruction versus ourselves. And a huge part of that is connecting with the way that the brain is being wired. And in that process, our spirit has been destroyed. I mean, a lot of people can't even interact within society that have had deep narcissistic trauma abuse to them, because that sense of self has been so destroyed that they won't even be able to feel that connection to spirit in a way that is, as free as what of us can experience. And I know that that's not directly talking about what you were saying there, but I noticed the correlation between the south nodes of Neptune and the north node of Neptune as a conditioning field for us to return back to healing through the emotional body, and how we as beings are. It's almost as if the world, when you look at it there as a natural conditioning factor, is waking up to this fact. I mean, you saw, for instance, classic case, right? Everybody saw Oprah Winfrey's communication there at the Oscars, and then you compare it to Donald Trump as an example. Like, there's a clear influence in the way that we're responding to Oprah Winfrey's communication, because it's rooted in this I don't know, it's like the divine, like we're waking up to that inner sense of self that is healing ourselves, whereas he represents a darker side of ourselves rooted in the past. And that contrasting reality has a lot to do with the way that we will understand evolution going forward. And for me personally, I wanted to share with everybody, I don't know, in March this year, there is a NOAC conference, which I'm sure you are aware of. And one of the lectures that I'm doing is the evolution from, or should I say, the evolution of humanity's spiritual awareness, and how in 2027, around about that time, with Pluto's transit into Aquarius, and amongst another couple of symbols like your Chiron reaching the same point as it was when it was discovered in 1978, that we are going to awaken to a state of self that will make this whole entire period of time right now completely aware, like what are we actually doing here. And it has a lot to do with artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence being this materialization of Neptune, south node of Neptune in Aquarius, and how that's revealing to us who we truly are. Anyway, a whole new discussion, but self-awareness coming through, evolving and recognizing the spirit within us. Sorry, I lost a little bit of track there. I hope that.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Well, thanks for saying, thanks for that. What I'm saying is thank you very much for this meeting. It's very brilliant. And for sowing the seeds that are making us curious to learn more. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that, to learning more from you.
Cool. So, thanks very much.
Everyone, thank you so much. Please thank Sïmõn Vorster.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.